Today, I will be discussing a very interesting topic, which Damian is a very experienced person in, I suppose the best word, because he founded and ran a club dedicated to discussing this topic, namely futurism. So why don't we, right off the bat, define what is futurism?
Well, it's basically it's like how you look at the future.
Mm.
It's when you look, I mean, there's a few different definitions. There's people who say, like, the future is important and, like, they treat it like kind of like a political thing. That's not really what I am going for. It's kind of like, maybe it's easier to define futurist as a person who, like, thinks about the future a lot and plans for it, things like that. And then futurism would just be like the idea of the future, kind of. But
Okay.
but it's mainly about science, though. So that is one thing. Science and technology, not so much about politics or whatever, although it can be. So.
So why is that? Is science the only thing that matters in the future?
No, no, not at all. But I think a lot of people just kind of assume that politics will be the same because it always has been. So,
Well, I mean,
or at least similar enough.
well, what do you mean people assume politics will be the same in the future?
Well, I mean, for example, if you go back and you look at, like, ancient Rome, a lot of their political issues are kind of the same as what we have now.
Mhm.
Maybe just substitute a couple things in for the technology that's changed, but other than that, it's kind of the same idea.
There's going to be
You know,
war. There's going to be a need for food.
right? You got to tax the roads. You got to,
Who
like,
gets who gets what when? Okay, things like that never change. Well,
yeah.
I mean, but so you're saying that science is the only thing that really fundamentally changes.
Well, I'm saying that some people believe that.
Okay.
Personally, I think that we may see a political shift in the future, one way or another,
Mhm.
because one of the big ones is that, as automation increases, we're going to have a lot less jobs just because there won't be as many jobs to go around. And our two main political or economic, really, ideologies, which would be like, capitalism, communism, and the blends between them. Neither one of those can really cope with that because how do you cope with no workers?
Mhm.
So that might be something where we need to develop something new to really consider what we would do in that situation.
But at the same time, we haven't reached this kind of utopia where
Yeah, we have,
automation replaces all
well,
workers.
utopia or dystopia, depending on your
Right,
point of view.
right,
But
exactly.
yeah, no, we haven't reached that point yet. And there's a few other things like, once we have colonies in outer space, that could be a political issue because how do you govern a space colony? We've never
Sure.
had to deal with that before. So when we do, it's going to be a whole new political thing
I
that's come
love
out
how
of it.
you're saying when we do
Right.
because it's really looking that way.
Hmm.
But in terms of futurism, um, what do you believe are the biggest concerns, um, scientifically speaking, at least? I mean,
Hmm.
obviously we talked a little political. What about scientifically?
Definitely energy.
Okay,
So where we get the energy from, we can't use oil in the future. I mean, if nothing else, it'll run out. So that's a no-go. So basically, we'll have to either use solar and wind, or we'll have to use fusion,
what about nuclear?
or nuclear. Yeah. I would bet that we'll have fusion soon, but
Yeah.
nuclear is actually a lot safer than most people think it is. So.
It,
But
it
there's
is unfortunate how much misinformation there is on nuclear.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it can certainly be dangerous, but when you engineer it right, it's pretty safe. Um,
It's kind of like cars. Yes, they
yeah,
can be dangerous, but can you imagine banning all cars? It's like,
right.
yeah,
And
so,
also, nuclear is safer than a lot of other sources as well. I think I read once that, like, coal plants probably kill something like 10,000 people a year by
oh, wow.
pollution, but nuclear's only ever killed a couple hundred ever. So it's not really comparable to, when things go bad, but
Right.
they don't usually go bad, so it's really safe. Fusion would be even safer, though. So obviously, and also more efficient, and also there's only so much uranium. So although we're not really going to run out of that anytime soon,
Well, I
still.
mean, if you kind of evenly space out the amount of fossil fuels you use until, basically stalling until you have totally self-reliant, renewable energy, I think we'll be okay if we just
If
use.
we started now, yeah. I mean, we probably won't have much of a choice, but unless we want to
Well,
stop everything.
well, one thing I wanted to talk about the concept of futurism is the philosophy that goes behind it. So, as you referenced earlier, we may have a utopia, we may have a dystopia, but I really believe that in all discussions on futurism, there should be some sort of philosophical discussion. And
Hmm.
how exactly does that ensue? What exactly is the groundwork for most discussions in that regard?
Well, the same as any philosophical discussion, I suppose. I mean, it depends on what exactly you're talking about. There's different philosophies regarding like the um, the way things are governed, kind of, I suppose. But that again, that ties back into our normal, society now. And then, of course, everyone has a different idea of what utopia would look like too. So that's,
Sure.
you get those kind of issues. Um, some people think that the future will involve like no one working and people just getting provided for and robots basically doing all the work.
That would
Some
drive
people,
humanity insane. I mean,
that's a very good, yeah. I
you
mean,
know, people need something to do, productive.
right, true, true. And that is also one of the big issues there. People talk about like, oh, would we just have a bunch of artists and philosophers? Would we maybe? Well, seriously, but I think how does that work?
Yeah, I
There's
mean,
definitely a
if
money.
everyone has, we've reached this point where we can get whatever we want. People don't exactly need to earn anything, so they
Right.
can.
They call it post scarcity, I believe is what it's called. A post scarcity civilization where basically there's enough of everything to go around to such an extent that
We can
like
actually do communism without anyone taking over, because what's there to take? You have it,
pretty
you know.
pretty much, yeah, exactly.
Well, then it
And
sounds
then maybe
like
a few things would be scarce enough to some specific things, but like yeah.
the only thing that people would fight over is, for example, is demanding that they conform to another belief or practice or lifestyle. So
That's true.
that seems like the only thing, because if you're not trying to enrich yourself or do something for yourself, you're just trying to, because you believe that person's doing something bad, you need to stop them, so you go to war, or you, I don't know, use some sort of, I mean, that seems like the only thing that would get people out of bed in the morning.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Possibly also, I mean, you know, people are greedy, so even when they have everything they need, they still want to fight over things. So I wouldn't be
True.
too surprised if that happened. Um, but
Are
who
you
really
optimistic
knows?
about the future?
I'm kind of like, I'm kind of one or the other. I think, I mean, and people have
Isn't
said this before.
everybody?
Well, people have said this before, like, it's going to be like the future is going to be like in the 70s or whatever. People used to say, like, either we're going to have a really good future and everyone's going to be, singing Kumbaya or whatever, or everything's going to be radioactive ash and everyone's going to be dead. And it's, there's not really a lot in between. I don't
I
really
mean, you don't
know.
think we're leaving? You don't think we're living that line in between right now, or?
I think we are, yeah. So that's why I'm saying, take it with a grain of salt, because people have said before. But I think that it is going to be one or the other. I think we're either going to have everyone get along, or with the kind of technologies we will have in the future, which will be even more powerful than nukes. I think if people are still fighting, that more people are going to be dead, and it's possible that would spread to everyone. So
So
kind of
you
like what
think?
we see now. We don't see a lot of war because if we ever had one, it would probably be the last one. So we probably would see something like that in the future. Either we would bury the hatchet, or you know, but somehow it's going to come to a head.
So I'm interested to hear what do you think is the most likely scenario that we have? The Kumbaya singing, world peace, kind of happy rainbow, sort of
Hmm.
nice future. What's the best chance for doing that?
Well, for me, I think we should have basically one government, but not quite like what most people think. I think that we should have a very federalist government essentially, but over the entire world, where
Uh-huh.
everybody lives kind of like in your city. Basically, I don't think there's a reason to separate, to have a country level, like where people identify with other people from their nation, but not others. Like it makes sense to identify with people from your city, but like, why? What do I have more in common with someone in New York as someone in Mexico City, which is just about as far away? So I think that in the future we'll probably see a lot where like it'll be kind of like, you know, the statists will get what they want because they'll have one giant state, but then all the libertarians will kind of get what they want as well because all the separatist movements will be allowed to just be independent of their former countries. They'll just be another province essentially in, you know.
Well, how can they be a separate province if they have this big worldwide umbrella federal government? It doesn't make. I don't see how
Well,
they
they'll
go together.
well, so like okay, so like if Texas wants to break away from the U.S., right?
Okay.
Then in the future they might say, okay, well, since you're both under the same umbrella now anyway, fine, Texas can be independent from the U.S. now. And so, you know, you won't have to. The only thing you'd have to deal with is the central government. I don't think the central government should be that powerful. I think what it should be is, personally, and I haven't really seen this said a lot, but I think that everyone should be allowed to live under whatever kind of government they want, like locally, but that there should be basically a few ground rules, and also that one of those ground rules should be that you should always be allowed to move. And so, like, if you want to live in a Marxist city, there should be a Marxist city somewhere, but you should always be allowed to leave if things go badly, which they probably would, given it's, you know, or if you want to live in a, you know, a completely capitalist, you know, city as well, that should also be an option. Because if you have what we have now, a lot of people aren't going to be satisfied. And so I think in the future, and so the central government would just make sure that everyone's allowed to move around and that no one group of people goes out of control and starts, you know.
So what's the check on this big central global power?
Well, itself, basically, the same as our government is. I mean, if you think about it, we kind of already have this. We have, like, you know, America can pretty much, if it wanted to, it could take over any country in the world.
Well, it'd
But we
be.
don't.
I mean, yes, that's true, but I mean, we can still we hold our elected officials accountable.
Right.
You know, and oftentimes the different branches of government within the government fight against each other.
Exactly.
So I mean, there's those kind of checks on power, but with a world government, I mean, do we like vote if we vote people in? Are there like some global constitution like this organization exists but can never do anything? It's kind of like the UN, you know, where they
like,
say
it would be somewhat similar to the UN, maybe a little more powerful, but probably not that much.
but the
I
thing is
also
that
think
in the UN you have Russia, China, Saudi Arabia on the Human Rights Council, you
yeah,
know,
exactly. Yeah,
you have
yeah,
that
you get
problem.
issues with that. Yeah. One problem with the UN is that they always have unanimous voting. So if one group of people, if one country wants to say no, they can't do anything. So they'd probably have to change that to really, honestly, if you started changing that, that probably would be the thing that would bring the UN to more power. But that might give them too much power, to be honest. So, you know, who knows really. It would definitely be something to work out. But I also think that it's kind of inevitable in a way because separating people by country, I think it's starting to make less sense to more people.
Well,
And
that doesn't make sense at all with this rise in I mean, you saw the EU
there
election
is that,
results.
yeah, definitely. There's a rightward bend as well in some places,
A
but
nationalist surge across the whole
nationalist
world.
surge, right, right. But that's not going to end very well because for one thing, it's not don't really like each other, and so because they're all nationalists of their country.
Sorry, you could you repeat that? You're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah, something happened with the data. So basically, can you see me?
You froze. I can barely hear you talk. Keep going.
But you can still hear me. Okay. So yeah, I think that you would definitely have some issues if you saw every country becoming more and more nationalist, like what we're seeing now. And so there may be, if you think about it, the nationalist surge is kind of a response to, you know, the liberal order that's been established for a while. So if we see that happen, that nationalist pushback, we may see another pushback in the future, and you know, and it may keep cycling back and forth, or maybe not. You know.
So you sound very inconclusive, and I appreciate that you don't propagate yourself as some
Well,
major
who
expert
knows?
on this, but I appreciate your opinion nevertheless. That it does mean a lot to me to hear your opinion, but you sound extraordinarily unsure.
Yeah, because well, no one has a crystal ball. No one knows what's going to happen in the future.
Well, no,
I
what
will
I'm saying
say
is
that I.
you don't sound very sure about or defined in terms of your perception of a global order.
Oh, I see. Well, I would say it would definitely. I mean, I'm not James Madison. I'm not going to come up with you know, some kind of system that's going to work for everyone or whatever. I don't think any one person will. I think it's kind of the whole point. But I will say that I think for sure in the future, people are going to start questioning you know, why I should have a government that's separate from someone in India or someone in Mexico or someone in, England or whatever. And I think that we may see a one global government in the future. How well that will turn out or what exactly that will look like, yeah, I don't really know. I don't think anybody does.
What place do you identify with of all the places you've lived?
Probably California. I haven't lived that many places, but yeah, I definitely like Santa Barbara. There are some issues here, though. I mean, I think one problem is that like a lot of times conservatives will often say that liberals don't really mean what they say, and that is actually kind of true a lot of times. So like a lot of liberals don't really care about other people. They just kind of go with the flow, sort of. Um, so there is that issue, but I do think that I probably would identify most with here versus New Orleans or versus the
Okay.
Western States.
Well, you're breaking up a little bit, so I think I'll cut this a little bit short. But
Yeah,
as soon as it's getting really, really interesting. Nevertheless, I thank you so much for your time, Damian. Please, folks, make sure to like, subscribe, share, and thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a great day. Thanks.